I'm working my way up from the chin into the forehead. So most of the concentrated darker values are down in the lower half of the face, and they should be. If the light source is coming from overhead, the top of the head is going to catch all the brighter light, while the bottom of the head will not. The planes in the jawline are turned under and away from the light source. They are not blaring out or sticking out far enough to catch the bright light. If I create the same kind of brightness in the chin as I do on the forehead, then I have incorrectly depicted the light source. I have broken the illusion of mass by putting a light above and below at the same intensity, thereby kind of breaking the illusion of depth. Depth is not only a back to front thing, but it is also a top to bottom thing. And it's something that we need to remember. It's not just a back to front thing, it's also a top to bottom thing. The top of this model is brighter lit than the bottom of this model because of where the light is positioned, and because the nature of light just tends to fall off or fall away. We have to play up on this, or else everything will be equally graphically lit. Another problem with beginners, they put everything into the drawing, but they don't consider that everything in the drawing should not be equal to each other, that the foot should not be just as contrasty as the head, that the hands should not be as busy as the face. These are things that you learn over time, and with a good instructor, they'll point out that things are getting overcomplicated or overworked. And that's why mentorship is very important. You always want to find somebody that you can lean on, because they do have answers. And they will tell you when you're doing something correctly, or when something that you did was just kind of done, but done poorly, or done out of context and not really thinking about what's going on in the picture. A mentor is important also, I think, for the advanced artist, because while we have surpassed the beginning stages, if we still don't know how to judge correctly, it is really vital that we find somebody who does know how to judge and can teach us what it means to see things the way we should be seeing them, or know how to judge them, know how to decide whether or not we've done something to its advantage or to its detriment. And that's where a good mentor comes in. These DVDs are not meant to be a mentorship. I am not going to jump out of the DVD and help you get better at your own mistakes. These DVDs are nothing but reference points, and things that you might never have heard of, things that you might have done forever but didn't know what they were or how they were termed, or that they were even defined at all as something specific. And it's a library of terminologies and so forth. You come back to it, and what was counterchange again, or what was perspective again in a nutshell, and you reference so that you can remind yourself. And hopefully these DVDs are going to be packed full of reference information that you can always go back to. And I hope that in each drawing that you can go back to it again and again and learn something new from the experience as you watch it one more time. It would be nice, though, if these were virtual DVDs and you could keep bringing in new assignments and new drawings each time, so that you're not staring at the same drawing over and over and over again. That becomes kind of what you would call a one-trick pony, if you only learn from one drawing, and everything that you've ever learned, all the markings are from that one experience. It could all of a sudden lead to all sorts of habits where everything you draw has that sameness to it. That's drawing in a vacuum. We don't want to be in a vacuum. We want to be in a classroom. We want to be in a space where we can experience other people working with us side by side, having those mentors over our shoulder. Online classes are great. Coupled with a live experience, they're amazing, because the online classes are stuff or information that you might not get wherever you live. Some teachers or some schools just don't have artists there because it's not a state or a location that artists are all striving to get to. Artists are concentrated in a few places: in the Chicago area, in the Los Angeles area, in the New York area, and it's the entertainment centers. That's where they're concentrated the most. If you live in the middle of America, or you live on an island somewhere where there isn't a whole lot of resources there, you're stuck. And your only mentorship is going to be the internet, which is not a bad thing. I'm not putting it down at all, but having both experiences is going to be so valuable to your career. Having somebody sit over your shoulder and help you decide what to do so you don't have to make those decisions in a vacuum. All right, so now defining beauty one more time. Defining beauty, shapes have a certain quality to them. They're either aggressive or they're beautiful. And I cannot put a definition to what beautiful is, um, specifically in terms of shapes or in terms of design. It's just by feeling that we look at something and we say to ourselves, that is beautiful, or that is not really that pretty at all. It has to do with, if I can define it, it has to do with how much you put into it, or how busy or complicated you made it versus how simplified, simple, carefree, or relaxed. How organized everything is together, how spatially forgiving everything is together, or how crowded and over contextualized everything is. Um, there are more attributes to defining what beautiful might be in this case, but it's sort of cerebral in drawing and painting, and it's definitely the viewer or the painter's tendencies that are going to create certain types of shapes. Not every artist can use every shape that well. I tend to favor curves more than angles, although when I do all my mechanical drawings, they're all very angular. My favoritism is towards curves. I have to work a lot harder at straight lines than curves, believe it or not. As straight as my hand might be in a lot of these instances, straight lines are not easy to do. They're mechanical and they're tough, and I have to work really hard at them. Where curves are very easy for me. So I know what my positive attributes are, and I know what I have to work hard at. And when I draw a picture, if I'm working towards a lot of straight lines, I really have to be clearly judgmental in what's beautiful in context to what is not beautiful or what is overdone. It just takes a lot more work. I think also in the same token, if you favor your strength, you also have to be very critical about is it beautiful, because you could overdevelop. For example, again, I'll use myself as the reference. If I push too many curves into a picture, then all of a sudden the picture could feel very mushy, less structural. Like there's no bones or no cartilage underneath the skin, if I'm doing a portrait, for example. And if that's the case, then we're not going to understand what we're looking at. We're going to say, this doesn't feel right. So it will be up to me to judge whether or not the curves that I've used are curved correctly or curved beautifully to where the picture feels good and where the marks that I've made are all pleasant enough for them to survive within the picture. Grouping things up. I'm trying to darken all of my masses of darks together and group them or join them together so that I don't have lots and lots of little tiny things everywhere. Dark hair has lots of little reflections, and I am going to be extremely picky about what I edit in the hair shape, or else I could be rendering hair for quite a long time. I could be just within the square inch next to her eyeball in that space for 40 hours trying to render the hairs. The objective, though, is not to beat this thing to death and overwork it, but to build something under the spontaneity of a time constraint and utilize all the rules that I have to develop something that feels fashionable, functional, beautiful, inspiring. And I don't know how many other attributes to that, depending upon whether it's going to be an entertainment piece or whether it's going to be an illustration or a fine art piece. I have to label in my mind how far it's going to go. And I also kind of have to have a limitation set within what I'm going to do. I only have 1 hour. What am I going to do? I only have 45 minutes. What am I going to do? And this drawing here, I think I spent about an hour and 20 minutes on it altogether. So within the amount of time that I have, an hour 20, what can I leave in and what can I take out that's going to make this girl look beautiful and not look old, masculine, less than beautiful? What can I do? And I have to make those choices ahead of time. And then once I start drawing, commit to most of those, but understand that I was judging something ahead of time. And now that I'm actually crafting it, I need to think things through with what's on the surface and not just what I had envisioned only. The two resources together have to go hand in hand with each other. The halftones that I'm grouping in here are also tying the dark shapes together. I don't want the eyes to sparkle with lots of dark and light little shapes. I want them to feel unified and harmonious as a larger entity or as a larger unit altogether. And I want the eye sockets to feel like they're a part of the nose and the cheek. So I'm thinking about the way all of these tones are being applied together, how they transition together, and how they are staying separate to form the field of light and to form the field of dark. How can I keep those elements separate enough to where we can see something? But then at the same time, how can I group them all together so that my picture doesn't become too busy? It's not easy making art. And think of how many contradictions I've just explained within this one demonstration. That's how often we fall into contradictions within drawing. You have a rule, but then you also have the output, the picture. And does the rule always work for the picture, or do you have to bend the rules to make the picture stronger? Or does the picture require none of these rules at all and actually require another set of rules altogether, right? We have to think about all of these things as we're building our picture. And as the elements come together, those choices will be easier to make because what's in front of you kind of helps decide what to do next. All right, so the pencil is being feathered over the surface very, very lightly. I'm using a 2H at this point, something very hard. And that harder pencil creates less texture. It actually creates like a steamroller effect. It smooths things out. And it smooths it out the way I like it. And I am very glad and very grateful that I practiced a couple of different types of drawing, starting with soft materials first and starting with hard materials first, to form a judgment and then have that judgment call rectified or acknowledged by having another instructor say, well, of course, that's the way you would want to do it. It kind of shows that in experimentation, I've found that there are two ways that you can create mass and volume with charcoal or with graphite, but each one of them has its own drawbacks and its own limitations and its own specific points of usefulness. Starting soft, going to hard, you have a tool that's much, much easier to remove in the beginning. So if you make any mistakes, it's easier to lift. And then the harder pencil embellishes it. Going from hard to soft, if you're using graphite especially, harder lines are harder to see. So by the time you get to the softer pencils, you have buried those pencil lines into the tonal array of what you're drawing. The problem with that is that you also need extra tools, smudging tools, because by the time you get to the softer values over the top of the harder pencils, they're more difficult to put down on the page because the harder graphite is made from a different consistency of wax than the softer graphite. So you have a battle now of materials, and those materials adhering to the surface, it's more difficult for them to do that. Pick your poison, which one you choose. Now in the charcoal drawing here, I've switched over to a harder pencil towards the end because this is effectively my blending stump in areas that I don't want to use my finger and over smudge, especially in the lighter spaces of the face. I don't want my fingers to over smudge because then it'll leave dark abrasive marks that are going to be next to impossible to lift out and remove from the picture. All right. I don't really have an abstraction for drawing lilies in hair. However, I want to express just enough volume in this shape so that it does feel like something and not just a blur on the forehead or on the side of the head. So I put in some values within it. All the shapes are really light, and I tried to keep the values non-competitive with the hair. Using the harder pencil definitely controls that and keeps those values from jumping too dark too fast. There's a lot of subtlety in the muzzle. You have, first of all, the muzzle is a forward protruding object. It's sort of like an orange half. And because of its mass, the top of it will be lit while the bottom of it will be less lit. And the further out the muzzle goes, possibly the bottom will be in shadow while the top will be in light. Possibly. And with a female, it's really easy to make the mouth look like a male very quickly because of all those surfaces that have to be rendered. So as I'm blocking in certain elements of the face or of the muzzle, I'm thinking first of all of the small controls. One of those is the nodes of the mouth. The nodes are the two corners. I'm shading one right now. They're the corners where all the muscles attach to the mouth that form the expressions, that form the gestures, smiles, frowns, and so forth. Because there are so many little muscles in that area, it tends to make the mouth area look a little bit more developed or more constructed. And I'm trying really hard to keep this mouth from becoming too overdefined, possibly leading towards a masculine shape. The jawline as well. When you draw an attractive jaw that is boxy, you have to be very careful not to over develop it in a masculine direction. While you can put beautiful features into the face, that jaw can always throw you back into something more masculine. And then you have a confusion of information. You have masculine and feminine shapes that aren't quite clear what they're trying to describe. So in this instance, I'm trying to keep the halftones blurry enough to where the jawline does feel angular, but not angular to the detriment of becoming too masculine. The same thing happens with the ball of the nose. If the ball of the nose is heavily constructed or is squarish, blocky, or bulbous, it's really easy to over chisel that shape and or overinflate that shape. And so it's really crucial here that I play up the halftones and I really try hard to connect them together subtly and not overexpress them. Too much tone here will create too many facets, will create too masculine a shape. I built up the halftones and now I'm knocking them back, but I'm knocking them back by drawing with the eraser. And hopefully the eraser drawing is going to lead to a ramp of value that goes from a darker edge to a softer edge very subtly and not too aggressively. And aggressively just means too quickly, going from dark to light so fast that it becomes a stripe instead of a transition. And then at the bridge of the nose, I want it to roll over into a sharper edge. So the top of the nose should not feel as soft as the bottom of the nose or where it's attached to the cheek. There should feel like there are differences between bones, cartilage, muscle masses, and tendons. And you should physically be able to see all those differences on the surface. If they have been sensitively mapped in the correct orientation, then you will definitely feel them. And I will go back and address this little tab or the little indentation at the chin several times because, well, to me, those little shapes get annoying. They create what's like a little butt on the tip of the chin. You have two different surfaces welded together in a little edge. And I don't want it to look that way because it won't read the right way. I want it to feel like something, but I don't want to over exemplify it. Right now, I just let it be because there are other areas in the face that I feel are more important to address first. And then I'll come back to an area like that and I'll play it down a little bit. So in this instance, I put the hair on both sides of the shoulders and I left this big negative space between there. And I actually want to build up the clavicles a little bit, the sternocleidomastoideus muscles, and the sternum just a little bit so that there is some interest between those shapes of hair. Otherwise, I framed a negative space that you're going to look at and go, well, where is this stuff here? How come the picture isn't finished yet? While we can say that, yeah, the shoulders aren't there and we're all good with that, we can't let that middle space go. We can't let all that information just be. So here I am coming back and addressing that little tab now, and I'm going to play it down even more. While I thought it was important because it is her likeness to play it up a little bit, I'm finding that I'm going to redesign it and try to tone it back as much as possible. And in fact, what I started to realize with her cleft in her chin is that it's actually not an indentation, but it's an extrusion. It's like a little ball at the ball of the chin, sticking off even further. And if I just embellish the smallest edge underneath that ball, it will do the job the way I need it. And I feel pretty good about that little shape now, although I feel like it's a little blurry and I could go back in and address it with a little more clarity. It doesn't bug me as much as the previous version when it was a much darker shape, floating by itself like a little island. Getting closer to the finish of the drawing, I start to look towards the outside edges of the shapes that I've drawn. And do they feel like they're going around, or do they feel cut off or cut? This flower should have sharp edges on it. It shouldn't feel like it's turning as aggressively as the hair around the head. It should have hard delineated edges that stop the eye from traveling any further, telling the viewer, this is it right here. This is the end of this shape. And just to the other side of this is an underside, like a roof with an eave, where the hair on the head should feel transitional. It should feel like it's traveling around to the back side of the head. They should have differences in the way they are established and laid out. If they don't have those differences, then everything is going to feel the same. The hair, the flower, and everything else. As I get darker and darker in the values of the hair, you can see that the values within the flower are lightening up even further and stepping back into space. One of the things that I did after the fact with this drawing is I went back into those lighter areas and I lightened them up even more. And I did that on purpose because I wanted that flower really not to compete with anything at all. But I don't think I did that in this drawing here with the camera filming it. I think I did it afterwards. And that's something also to address. Just because you finished a drawing in the live experience doesn't mean that you cannot go back into it later and make alterations. If you have an answer to make the drawing stronger, by all means, please do so. If you need the model to make that distinction, then hire the model back for a few moments or bring them back. Sometimes if they're just sitting for a portrait, they won't mind sitting for 15 extra minutes. But if you're pulling them out of their day, they might ask you to pay them a little bit. And never hesitate on that, because you're going to get paid for this too. You're using their face to make money, then you should pay the model as well. Everybody should get something out of this, right? As much as I want to be able to cheapen the experience for myself and not have to pay as much for everything, I also understand what my job is. And if I don't pay people properly, then I won't get what I need out of my art. So these little bits that I'm doing now, you can see that the marks that I'm making are much, much smaller now. They're getting tighter and smaller and down to the little nitty-gritty things. I'm not doing big, gigantic, aggressive things anymore. That time has come and gone. If I have to do anything large and aggressive one more time, then what I would do is put a veil of tone over everything and call it a day. But this picture, I've been regulating along the way. I've been rounding out shapes. I've been softening forms. I've been doing all the things that I need to progressively along the way, so I don't have to go back afterwards and do something to the whole picture to bring it all back together. I'm very aware of that concept as I'm building it up. If you notice also, when I change something, I don't go in there and drastically just wipe it out and start all over again. I mold what's already there into the more appropriate direction. I'll take darks and I'll push them back and forth until they make the right shape. I'll do the same thing with the lights, but I'll do it on the edges of the shapes between the light and the dark. I'll work within those parameters. If the drawing is just that far gone that I have to start the whole space again, I might just start the whole drawing over, because that much erasing is really going to ruin the surface. And the idea with drawing is to create an experience that feels spontaneous and fun and not labored over. That's not to say that all drawings are going to be effortless. That's not what I'm saying at all. A good drawing is actually well planned, well thought out, and a lot of hard work is invested into making that drawing feel the way it should. What I'm saying is that when you get done with the picture and you hang it on the wall, it shouldn't look like a map of a battlefield. It should actually feel like everything was carefully placed, carefully planned, um, and in a spontaneous, enjoyable, fun sort of way. I'd say a painter that comes to mind when I think of this is Sargent. His brushstrokes feel very spontaneous, but they were labored over, painstakingly labored over, to the point where it probably brought that guy more ulcers than any of us have ever experienced. He tore down and destroyed a lot of canvases to create the perfect picture, but in the end, the beauty and the simplicity of his works, that's what we're trying to achieve in our works too. So yeah, I'm putting a last few markings down on the picture, and it's just for the sake of creating balance in those shapes.